All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This time, not so long a wait from last episode. But yeah, I just want to start with thank you for your time, taking the time out of your lives to listen to me interview one of my classmates. Um, this is an older video, so it's it's back when now I have shorter hair, but yeah, it's back when I had long hair. So if you do watch the episode, you'll see that. And yeah, I finally got around to editing it, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, hello. I'm here with fellow history classmate, or just classmate in general, Zack Ledesma, who he likes to be referred to as supreme leader. Would you like to
That's
introduce
me.
yourself?
Yes, I am Zach. If you're watching this, you've probably seen me or at least heard of me. I get around. I'm a student. That's about as descriptive as I can get.
Fair enough, fair enough. Okay, and I'm bringing you on the podcast today to talk about some interesting topics. We talked
Interesting.
beforehand about maybe something touching on morality in the context of a pandemic, as well as I think some philosophical thoughts that you want to perhaps pose. I guess to start, how's your day?
My day was actually pretty good. Pretty good. We did some nice running and track. Everybody join track and field. Or don't if you don't like running, but you should still do it. Did some nice studying. Obviously, nice with the short classes, juniors and seniors. My deepest condolences, honestly. But it is kind of funny to just go around pretending like you, not that you don't exist, but that we just don't have to care about you. So that's been great. Short days have been great. Short periods were fantastic today. And for the people who had testing, yikes.
Yeah, so for context, currently, or for today and for the rest of the week, today being Tuesday, we have delayed openings, and that is because of standardized testing that I believe the juniors have to take for like
Juniors
a
and seniors.
graduation, yeah, a
It's poor
graduation
people.
like requirement or whatever it is. So do you enjoy your 2 hours off, 2 hours extra sleep in? I know
I
you
did,
get up pretty
yes.
early, but
Yeah, not super early. It's like whatever 6:30 normally, and today I decided to make it 8, and we were just jamming. It's great. It's great to have extra time in the mornings. Like there were even people who I was talking to who were just saying they were just performing better in the day because they didn't have to. Well, the periods were shorter, and they just had brain power from the sleep. So yeah, nothing. There's never anything wrong about sleeping more.
true. I mean, recently, I think, or recently being like in the past few years, I think there's been talks of like the benefits of pushing school back like a couple of hours or having like start at like 9 or 10 even. Thoughts?
hmm That I would say. Yeah, so here's the thing. I'm somebody who comes at it from the perspective of there's a lot of things that obviously you have to do after school generally. If you're doing sports, if you're doing clubs, people have obligations outside of school. So if you mess with the school schedule, sometimes it can push that to be you almost end up with the same problem where suddenly people are going to be operating on a super duper late schedule if you just push school out. Because there's not a whole ton that people do in the mornings, as far as I can tell. Like, not a ton of people are doing their work in the mornings. There's not really any like clubs or anything that meet, at whatever 8 or 9. So if you end up pushing school, I feel like you're really just going to be pushing things further into the night, which is obviously not exactly what people would want. I would say, if you really wanted to solve a problem like that of, kids feeling overworked, or if you have to, people cram studying, realistically, you'd either have to sort of give more options in the morning. So if you push school, give something like extra office hours beforehand, or there's sort of like almost like like an optional study hall or something like that. It'd have to be a little more it'd have to be a pretty revolutionary reform if you were to push it and still have everything else work to the benefit of what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to get kids to sleep more and to worry less about, waking up early, you either have to shorten school or shift the schedule so that it's more morning oriented anyway.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I don't know. I think like in the moment, everyone likes having an extra 2 hours. But I think yeah, if you were to push off or push back school, I think yeah, you'd have to push everything else back. So maybe it wouldn't work necessarily as intended. everything just going later and then people waking up later as well.
It's true. I mean, it's a balance. Look, we're learning about it in economics. I just forgot. I had the word for it and I forgot it. But it's a matter of you have to pick priorities of what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Changes you want to make, what they would benefit, who they would benefit, and what the drawbacks are. And that's why I often say, it must be a really difficult job. We as students harp on school bureaucracy all the time because it directly affects us and we don't see the goings on behind changes that we may not like, things like community, things like the Wi-Fi stuff that we've been going on, as I'm sure, a lot of viewers would be familiar with. But at the end of the day, a lot of us do recognize these are people who a lot of the times don't have any kind of direct input in the day-to-day lives of students, of how it will affect students. They're operating from this hand above. So changes like this, changes that they may see as potentially beneficial, they're kind of put in an impossible position where they have to guess and see how it will be received, right, what the potential effects would be. And if they end up being negative, pretty much all the blame ends up falling on them for no real reason, just because they're the ones who made the decision. So something like that, big reforms, school reforms like that, to make it go more smoothly, I think you would need a lot more consideration of costs, benefits, effects, which, again, they take into consideration. But from the position of a student, we're only going to hyper-focus on the things that are worse about it. Right. We're only going to focus on how much later we have to study, or how much work we have to do in the mornings now when we previously didn't have to do work. And that's just inherent in general. I think people are kind of more drawn to negative things. So jobs like that, where you have to make big decisions about large groups of people, it's a thankless and impossible job to have to really manage. So heart goes out to everybody who has to make those calls and deal with the consequence.
Right. I mean, you also have to just the logistics of it. Like, you have to address the needs of, or I guess you have to at least take into account the needs of, a variety of different students that come from, maybe a variety of different backgrounds, a variety of different experiences. Maybe I have something after school, maybe someone doesn't. Maybe some people are waking up super early, some people super late. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So you seem to be pretty opinionated as well as well-informed, well thought out on the topic of school. Thoughts in general about school? Do you like school?
So I have a lot of thoughts about school. This will be a long episode if you end up going into this. I generally do legitimately enjoy school because I see it as a means to an end of whatever life I want to live out of school. So the future, it is essentially a step towards the future I want to live. And I've always been very, very, blessed and gifted that both my parents and my own work ethic have pushed me to work hard, to get good grades, to want to achieve academically, which means I never really hated school like some people do. There are some people who just aren't studious people. They don't like school and they don't want to go in. I was very lucky in that I was always supported when it came to my education. And so even as a high schooler, when it's this, relatively tumultuous time in all of our lives, when we're going through all these changes like COVID and things, honestly, I really have enjoyed it because it's provided me with experiences that I otherwise never would have been able to have. Right. Things like sports. I really, really never was involved in sports before I came to Livingston High School, and that provided me probably the most. The thing I hold the most pride for is my running career as of the moment, and so it provides at least somebody like me with a lot of opportunities for personal success and ability to enhance my own standing. That being said, that is also a symptom of sort of a culture, and if any of you have Mr. Cuneo, if any of you watching, he talks about this extensively, where everybody is hyper expected to succeed, especially in a school like Livingston. I've always been able to deal well with the pressure personally because my parents are very, very supportive when it comes to my academics. They never, overpressure me. They're very conscious of what I want to do, how it revolves what they want me to do. And it's a really good situation. But for a lot of people, there's just an automatic expectation. You have to do well. If you don't, you're a failure. That's it. And success is a lot of the times determined by things like grades, AP classes, GPA, where you want to go out of high school. And for those people, a lot of them, it's this hyper pressured, sort of crushing experience, which is a shame because it can be this incredibly beneficial, helpful thing, which is what it was designed to be. I mean, we're learning about it now in history. It was designed to help people prepare for the future and for the workforce. And a lot of people have evolved this into this competitive, dog eats dog, I have to do this whether I want to or not situation, and they end up lost.
Right, right, right. I mean, as someone who's grown up in the Livingston environment, or at least the school system, yeah, I think it's something that's definitely really prevalent, especially in high school when classes start separating into maybe AP or honors, and whatever that means in regards to your intelligence. But do you have any particular thoughts on maybe the environment? We all know that Livingston is pretty competitive, and that the pressure is definitely on for you to do well academically. And so, thoughts on that, or maybe any personal experiences that you feel like maybe were positively affected by that environment or negatively?
Absolutely. So for a little bit of context, I came from California in 7th grade. I went to one elementary school my entire life, kindergarten through 6th grade. So I never really experienced what high school was like in the other state. However, I do have a lot of friends who still go to high school in California, where I used to live.
Right.
And I've told this story in class a couple of times to a few people. There is a big difference between the culture of Livingston High School and other places. Again, I only have a sample size of 2, so take this with a massive grain of salt.
Fair enough.
But from what I can tell, Livingston High School does produce excellence, sometimes at the cost of not necessarily individuality, but individual happiness. In California, I have a friend, very close friend of mine. I've known him for a very long time. He was always hyper driven by his father, and it got to the point where it was legitimately, it was unhealthy because of it, because he didn't feel like he wanted to be pushed this hard. He didn't want the same things his father wanted.
Right.
And when he got to high school, and there were a few personal things that went on in his life, but when he got to high school, he finally had an opportunity to pursue what he wanted to without this overarching pressure over him, because now he could pick his own classes. He could choose what he wanted to pursue, what he didn't. He's a band member. He gets good grades. I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, there's this sort of warped perception in places like Livingston High School where a 4.0 is the minimum. And if you're below that, you're doing something wrong.
Unlucky.
Unlucky, exactly. So he was in a position where he was very happy, and is very happy, to get, B's pluses, mostly A's, but B's pluses in classes that aren't honors, aren't APs, but things that actually interest him, and things like, music, arts. He's a big band guy, trumpet player, and he just doesn't, when I'm talking to him about things like school, he doesn't have the same kind of hyper focus on the future that so many people here do. Right. It's almost like this feeling of, if we don't do this here now, it is going to ruin us later. It's this mad dash to be better, to be the best, to get the best grades, to get a higher grade, to be in a higher class. And if you don't do that, somehow you're going to fall into poverty and death. But there's a totally other side of it where, you understand, look, we're in a very, very fortunate, not only nation, but region of that nation.
Right.
A lot of us have parents who are very well off, or if they weren't, they were able to at least get themselves high enough that they're here now. Children of immigrants, a lot of immigrants came over and built essentially from nothing into what are legitimately very successful families and businesses and the like. And yet still in this position where we're in one of the best high schools in the country, certainly at least in the state, a lot of us are incredibly successful when it comes to both academics and sports and extracurriculars. I mean, you have to consider, the next leaders of this world, chances are going to be coming from places like Livingston High School. It doesn't take a whole lot to shoot a little under that and be a lot happier. Again, not everybody has to be a congressman or a politician or, you know, an entrepreneur. Nobody has to be the next Elon Musk. And this is something that I've sort of experienced in my own life as well. I've always put sort of undue pressure on myself to succeed, and part of that comes from sort of growing up, being in these formative years in this competitive environment. And it's less of a conscious thing in the minds of students. It's more so just, it's such an automatic expectation that people want to do well that they don't even think about it. You know, nobody bats an eye if you're taking 4 or 5 APs. It's just, oh yeah, you take 4 or 5 APs. Of course you do. You know, nobody bats an eye at somebody who holds like what are legitimately, you know, like successful leadership positions. You know, head of the robotics club. When you get, you know, people, the robotics club is what I'm particularly familiar with. You know, they got a massive grant for something like $10,000, and you know, winning competitions, legitimately being very successful. And while they were very prideful of it, of course, it's kind of just seen as this like, oh, that's neat, you know, good for you, great. When in reality, like, that's a really impressive thing to do. That's a very small portion of people get to experience anything like that, get to experience that kind of success. Even with things like the debate team, sports teams, this kind of competition, while it produces, honestly, some of the best in the world, it also leads to this normalization of excellence. Whereas if you're not achieving that, you're falling behind, which just isn't reality. And it can, at its worst, lead to, you know, really tragic situations where kids feel lost or they feel behind, despite being in, you know, the top 5, top 3, top 2, 1% of the country and of students, because, you know, whatever, they got a B+ or a C on some paper sometime. So it's really a broader cultural thing, I think, in the region and in the school.
Right. I mean, also, just being in Livingston, you know, the environment's like, you know, you have a lot of people who are really successful that move here because of the good education, as well as, you know, the overall just really good environment. I think Livingston's clean, you know, it's safe, you know, has really good educational system, as we discussed. But I think, yeah, it creates this environment where success is almost like expected, right? Like, and not even just success, but like excelling and stuff, right? So it's not just, you know, sometimes I think to be satisfied, people are, you know, they see themselves as having to be the next Elon Musk, right? Having to be super, super, super successful. But yeah, I guess, do you think that, to what extent would you hold someone's success, or I guess the amount of successful people that maybe a system like this produces, to maybe the detriments it has upon a student's maybe social life, mental health, relationships, etc.?
What it definitely does is, for the people who can manage it well, it's the best environment. I can say that for the people who manage it well, this is the ideal, because it challenges people in a way that very few other places can. Again, competition is good. It's very good, because it honestly does produce the best in the world. You know, doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, the whole nine. You know, people who society needs and relies on every day, a lot of the times have to come from high stress, high pressure environments to become these hyper specialized and very successful people. The question then is, are those people happy in what they do? I would argue not a lot. You know, not a lot. Some, yeah, and I come from this from a perspective of some familiarity, because it's a career that I would like to at least marginally pursue. Lawyers are one of the most miserable people, like, per capita on the planet. Like, there were several polls, and I may be able to pull it up, taken, where lawyers consistently scored as some of the lowest people satisfied with their jobs out of any career, which is so weird to think about, because there's so many people in these kinds of environments who are pushing for jobs like this, who are trying so desperately to get to these places. And what we're finding is, for a lot of people, when they get there, they've gone through all these years, what are legitimately the best years of their lives. I mean, ask anybody. And when they wanted to go back to, they would say high school and my 20s. Those would be the years, because those are the most, those are your young years. Those are your formative years. Those are when you start becoming an adult and when the world sort of opens up to you. And in these hyper-competitive environments, people who may have passions for completely different things are pushed into careers simply because of the prestige these careers carry. Again, your doctors, your lawyers, your engineers. And despite not being passionate about it, they will throw themselves against the stones and grind on courses and tests and essays and class after class after class for hours and days and weeks and years. Go through colleges, get into a good college, go to postgraduate school, law school, medical school, end up in these incredibly high-paying, successful jobs where by any other metric, it would be incredibly rewarding, and they still end up being just legitimately unhappy with the place that they've ended up in. And that's one thing that's always terrified me is, if I go and I work, and I think this should terrify every student, if I work through the physically and mentally best years of my life, maybe not mentally, there's some argument there, but certainly physically most healthy, successful years of my life, towards a goal that I end up despising, that's a waste. That's a legitimate waste. And there are people who I see, who I know, who are genuinely wasting away this part of their life, seeking something that they don't really want because they think it will bring them some kind of status later. And that is very much a symptom of a system like this that prioritizes success over all else. Because, and again, it's on the mind. In history class today, we were going over the transcendentalists who are of the belief that man's really only pursuit should be an individualistic pursuit of happiness, not necessarily to the detriment of others, but to one's own benefit.
Right.
And that is the complete opposite of Livingston High School and this kind of system. And again, that isn't to say that it's not a successful system. It's just not the one most productive of success, or not of success, excuse me, of happiness. And then you have to balance, well, which one's better? Societally, success is way better because we need those doctors, those lawyers, those hyper-skilled, hyper-pressurized, people who can work harder than anybody else. But on the flip side, if you're one of those people and you just went through all of these years to get to this place and you're unhappy, that's the last thing you want to have happen to you. So if we're talking benefit cost, you really have to make sure that you are a person who can succeed and who will be happy under a system like this. Because a lot of times it'll blindside you that you're not, and by that time, it's almost too late. So I really do urge all students and teachers and parents for that matter, think about, really sit down, think about, because I had to do this, what inspires you, what makes you happy, what can you see yourself doing for the rest of your life? If you don't know what that is, that's totally fine. We're like 15, 16. Nobody has any idea. But start thinking about it now and don't blindly pursue, oh, yes, I want to be a doctor because my parents said so and because I want to make a lot of money. Great that you want to make money. Great that you want to work hard. But at the end of the day, there's a reason pursuit of happiness was written into the Declaration of Independence.
True.
That's the bottom line. And when you think about it, even philosophically, the entire point of life is to be happy. Whether you get that happiness out of the happiness of others, out of feeling like you produced something, out of working hard, a lot of people do, and those people should be in positions like this hyper-competitive environment. But if you're not one of those people, if you're somebody who, enjoys music or art or writing or, discussion or something like architecture, there's no reason that you have to take 4 APs, 5 APs, 6 APs and grind to the very last bone in your body so that you can get into a certain college. It's just not, it's not what will lead you to success. Again, enjoy yourself, push yourself, but enjoy yourself. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. I would say I definitely agree with you. But I think a part of me still feels like that it's not exactly fair to pit your happiness and your enjoyment against hard work. I guess maybe how I see it is that I understand how, maybe these are the best years of your life and that, sometimes things are uncertain right now and so maybe you shouldn't overwork yourself. However, I think it's not entirely fair to say that and ignore the impacts that this part of your life does have on your future, right? I think maybe getting into a good college is not everything, but I think it can be certainly a lot, right? I think you can definitely be exposed to different environments where, others successful people, right, who are really hardworking, who are striving for a collective goal of, becoming, maybe, or filling like a prestigious role or something. But I think it's not entirely fair to say um, that I guess like, I don't want to say slack off, but I feel like at the same time, while you say that, I think these years, your teenage years, going into high school and college, are some of your the best years of your life. But I also think that it's not entirely fair to neglect the side that it's like that they're also really important, and that I think to a certain extent you should work yourself, and I think maybe giving up a little bit of your happiness for success down the line might be okay. I mean, do you agree with that, or would you say?
No, I would 100% agree. You're right. And I was talking with a little bit of a sort of absolutist tone. You cannot be hedonistic. Hedonism leads to destruction. If you're just, without thinking, pursuing happiness, immediate happiness over everything else, that's just as bad, if not worse, as squandering your happiness now for a future goal. And that's the other thing is, if I did believe that, I would be hypocritical because I am pushing myself, despite the fact that I recognize I'm probably not going to be somebody who wants to work in that super high pressure, high stress environment.
Right.
Just because, I feel it. I mean, like you said, these are definitely important years, and they will determine, at least to a certain extent, what school you go to, which will, to a certain extent, determine what career you go into, which is why you kind of want to determine what you want to do. But it's not necessarily the end all be all. I'm speaking more on the sort of the extreme end of the spectrum, which is particularly noticeable in a place like LHS, which are people who only pursue a future goal, completely neglecting their current happiness, who are giving away more of their happiness than the work will give back to them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Everybody has to do things they don't want to do. It's absolutely true of life. You're gonna have to, and everybody has to become familiar with that. And it is definitely worthwhile to shoot high and end up, I guess, operating short of that. So it's kind of like the old adage: shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll end up among the stars. You can shoot for Harvard, not make it, and end up in a terrific school. And that's a legitimately a good way to sort of look at it, where, shoot high, especially if you don't know what you want to do. Because if you don't know what you want to do and you end up wanting to be a hyper successful person, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, then you want to set yourself up for a position where you can take advantage of that, should that be what you want to do. Like, that's what I'm doing. I'm taking a lot of APs. I'm taking, AP Comp Gov, APUSH, AP Lang, the whole nine. I don't necessarily want to become a historian or anything, or even become a lawyer. I don't know that yet. But I'm operating under the assumption that I'm going to sacrifice some of my time right now, some of my happiness right now, to pursue these hard classes, so that when I get to the position where my choices really matter and I have to make real decisions about my life, what school I want to go to, what degree I want to pursue, I will have the background now that will set me up for those positions if I want to take them. Again, it's an incredible opportunity to be here, and everybody should take advantage of those opportunities. But it's more so you don't have to be the best. That's sort of a better way to put it. You can operate a little under the highest bar and still be very, very successful. But I definitely agree with you. Even if these are our best years, sacrifices have to be made throughout your entire life for the good of your future. Again, you can't just sacrifice short-term pleasure because it's going to hurt you long-term. So yes, you're definitely right. That's a major clarification to make.
Okay. To I guess also focus on an aspect of your point, and that being happiness, right? I think what you're presenting happiness is like this one all-encompassing goal of life, right? Like, especially what we're learning in class with the transcendentalists, where an individual's happiness is number one priority. However, I want to get your maybe take on something that I think I've been considering, and that is more. I think I find it that I guess like the pursuit of happiness for others is also very important, if that makes sense. I think for me at least, I value the I don't know, it's hard to say, but like I think I value the welfare of others, and so especially with the transcendentalists and how they really push like individualism and operating on your own accord. But I think that's one of the few things that I disagreed with them on, and I think that community is definitely a large part of life. And so I think to what extent would you say that the goal of life is not necessarily the pursuit of happiness for yourself, but rather for others?
That I mean, that's basically the balance that people have been trying to strike for since human beings existed. Um, and you're right. Because somebody like a psychopath, their pursuit of happiness would be murdering a ton of people. That's not great. We don't want that to happen. Somebody who likes a lot of money, maybe defrauding people, and it makes them very, very happy because they're making lots of money, but it's to the detriment of everybody else. I think that's the line where it's an interesting concept that also has to incorporate all aspects of society, economy, policy, and society in general. That's the line, I think, where law exists, like actual legal code exists. Because legal code can distinguish between when the pursuit of one's happiness turns to the taking away of happiness of others.
Yeah, like it impedes the pursuit of happiness for other people.
Exactly. Yes. And this is a more sort of like libertarian philosophy almost, but it's that the main existence of the state is to sort of be the, I don't even know what the word is, sort of be the enforcers of the social agreement that everybody operates for their own benefit, so long as it isn't to the detriment of others. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of the way society operates. You can pursue as much happiness for yourself as you want, so long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. Which obviously is a little sort of that's the gray line that has existed forever. That's the gray line that exists between whether or not the state should influence the economy, whether or not the state should influence things like modern medicine. I mean, there's a whole host of issues that come up with this broader idea of happiness of the individual versus happiness and potentially security of the collective. And if you want to go even broader, that's the argument between freedom and security. Where can a balance be struck where people can pursue as much happiness as they want, but general society is still safe? Because again, the purpose of the state is to maintain that safety while still allowing for as much freedom as possible. So that balance is, in my opinion, it is struck between almost between when somebody's actions, again, it's that's really the most complicated question, because somebody's own actions may influence somebody else in completely different ways, and there's no real way to predict that. It's an infinite calculation of whether or not me writing this bad check is going to influence somebody else down the line. And that's why sort of societal interactions is so hard. If you're speaking just on the terms of the individual, we all understand killing people is bad, hurting people is bad, cheating on your spouse is bad, right. Stealing is bad. They're generally universal ideas that we can agree on as being good or bad for security and for freedom. Even if it makes you happy, what you should and shouldn't do. And the issues start to arise with outliers who don't follow those socially accepted concepts. And that's why law has to step in. But you're right. It does go beyond just like the legal codes, if you think about it, because you can wrong somebody and have it be completely legal. Again, you could cheat. Well, it's a little different if it's on your spouse, but you could cheat on a boyfriend or a girlfriend and have it be completely within the law and still be causing that person an incredible amount of, unhappiness. So to what end is that moral? Well, you were doing it for the pursuit of your own happiness, but it was to the direct detriment of somebody else's, but it was still legal. So where does the line for morality lie? Of course, most people would say that it's immoral because you made a certain commitment to a person, but you may not see it that way. And again, is it moral or not, whether or not you saw it as right or wrong? That's the question. So it is, again, infinitely complex. If you wanted to boil it down, pursue your own happiness so long as it isn't to the general detriment of others.
Right. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to shift the conversation more towards morality, but I think like just the pursuit of happiness in general definitely does have a large effect on morality. Or I think even just giving the example of your parents, where maybe they are sacrificing some of their time and maybe some of their happiness, for the success of others, right? That being their children, and so I guess shifting more towards morality and the delineation between like good and bad. What do you think makes a good person, and what do you think makes necessarily a bad person?
That's a very large concept.
Yeah, it's a big shift, so I understand.
Yeah, no. It's interesting. So that requires a certain amount of definition. Good and bad are sometimes considered subjective. In my opinion, if you want to talk about a good person, if we're talking in moral terms, a good person is somebody who follows the rules that we just set out, where they pursue their own happiness so long as it isn't to the detriment of others.
Right.
And a bad person is somebody who pursues their own happiness or potentially unhappiness to the detriment of others. And it's a large question because that is a completely subjective measure. Again, the reason that's such a hard question to answer is because the question that we just asked is also a hard one. Whether or not the pursuit of your own happiness to the detriment of others is moral also dictates whether or not a person is good or bad.
Yeah.
If you put more focus on the individual and on their contribution to a society, it's potential for somebody to be completely moral while still committing, what would socially be considered very heinous acts. I mean, if you think of somebody like a producer, like let's say, or a mass corporation like Apple, if Apple is producing, tens of thousands of jobs and devices that millions of people rely on for communication and entertainment and are essentially a cornerstone of the American economy, but at the same time are in some third world country exploiting, what is essentially unfree or underage labor. Well, does that make them moral? Well, on the one hand, they're creating what is a miracle of the 21st century, and on the other hand, they're participating in barbaric practices. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but
right.
That's where the line gets so murky, where it's like, well, there's benefits and there's costs. That's a little different because it is a sort of syndicate of many people. It's a company, so you can't necessarily draw human morality from it. If somebody's like, let's say somebody's giving a ton of money to the homeless, but in the next town over, the Robin Hood example.
Yeah,
If
I was
you're
gonna
stealing
say
from
that
the
actually.
rich,
I was
yeah,
gonna say
if you're
if you're
stealing from
looking
the
for an
rich,
example, yeah.
giving to the poor, well, you're taking somebody's hard-earned money, but you're giving it to people who need it. Is
Right.
that moral? Is that justified? You're removing the happiness from from one person and giving it potentially to many. But is that person any less deserving of happiness than all of these other people?
Right. How do you pit one life against another?
Absolutely. Of course, the rationalist would say, well, if you're just doing simple math, one person being unhappy versus many being happy is better than many people being unhappy and one person being happy. But then you have to get into, well, is it justifiable that somebody who's potentially worked very hard to get a lot of, whether that be wealth or success, it can have that taken away and given out to people who may be less deserving of it, and who determines that? And that's, of course, the argument between socialism versus communism, planned versus market economy. And that's a can of worms because, again, it is based on the idea of morality at its very core. That's not true. That's not true. At their very core, they're based on human interactions. And human interactions are so complex we cannot even begin to comprehend them. If you're talking macroeconomics, if you're talking a broad society, it is near impossible to create any kind of actually discernible model for how they should operate, which is why it's so difficult to make policy that benefits the most people. But that's also going a little bigger. If you're just talking about the individual, and a good person is somebody who follows the rules that we set out, where they pursue their own happiness if it doesn't hurt other people. And a bad person is somebody who doesn't do that. And the problems start to arise when you consider when the pursuit of one's own happiness is to the detriment of others. And I think you could apply that idea to nearly every problem in modern or in past history, society, economy, politics. All of it boils down to that idea.
Right. Okay. I mean, we've touched on some pretty big parts of life, that being happiness as well as morality. If we want to shift again to maybe now philosophy and how you should approach life, and maybe what's the purpose of life, taking into account maybe happiness and morality, how do you think you should approach life? What do you think is the purpose of life? If there is not necessarily a definite or like a defined purpose of life, how should one go about defining that, or I guess like finding your own purpose?
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of that is subjective based on the individual, but in general, if we're talking about my own personal philosophy, or at least the way I operate my life, I've kind of subscribed to the philosophy of, and everybody should read this, it's a very good read, of Marcus Aurelius, Roman Emperor. I know, teenage whatever, but he has a philosophy that essentially says you have to live every day as though it's your last day on Earth. You just have to. Because what that does is it makes you approach every day as though everything you do in it is important. And that can be a very, very stressful approach, obviously, because suddenly you're under a amount of perceived pressure, because if it's your last day on Earth, of course you want to operate as well as you can. But what it does is it gives you an amount of, when taken in moderation, it gives you a certain level of haste for the present, which is good, because what it does is it doesn't let you waste anything. It doesn't let you waste any of your work, any of your time, or any of the happiness that you take in. The flip side of this philosophy is that you may rush through things that could potentially make you happy in order to seek maybe hedonistic. Well, actually, that's the flip side. It may make you seek hedonistic happiness and ignore the future if taken to an extreme. If you live every day as though
that's what I was
the
gonna
end.
ask. As if you're implying that there is no tomorrow at any point, then how can you be doing something that positively affects tomorrow, but maybe negatively affects you today?
That's absolutely true. And that's sort of, and it's not, again, it's not totally like, it's not literally meant to be taken live today like you're going to die tomorrow. But it's also easier to apply to things that don't, non-negative things, I guess you could say. It involves the idea is live today as the person you want to be on the day that you die, which is, I think, is a better way to put it. If somebody were to take if you were to die tomorrow, you want to act today in the, of course, the best way that you can. Because if tomorrow you die, you want your last day to have been, your most happy, your most productive, the best version of yourself. Which is why it is a legitimately, when taken well, a legitimately useful philosophy. I can go into school and think, okay, I'm going to behave today as though this is the last day I will ever have at this school. Yeah, let's take it down a notch. The last day I'll ever have at this school. Today is my last day. I want to be as nice to my teachers as I possibly can. I want to work as hard in my classes as I possibly can so that they remember me as a hardworking, diligent student. I want to enjoy the company of all my friends as much as I can, because who knows when I'll see them again. So it doesn't have to be quite as foreboding as death, but I mean, again, we don't necessarily know when it's going to end. It could end tomorrow. Crazier things have happened. We live in a time and a place where all kinds of, what probably would have been classified as world-ending disasters, we just kind of breeze through. And
become the norm, but yeah.
It become the norm, exactly. And so your own personal happiness and the person you want to be should be exemplified as much as you possibly can, as often as possible. I guess, if that kind of makes sense. Personally, for me, that involves being hardworking, that involves being kind to people, being as honest, as straightforward, as diligent, as approachable as I possibly can, as often as I can. But if you want to talk broader purpose, because of course that philosophy doesn't work if you have future goals necessarily, that you can't base what you want to do in the future off today being your last day.
Yep.
I operate on the idea of, in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, what kind of life do I want to be living? Not just what I want to be doing, because that's what a lot of people consider. It's a very important thing to consider. Your career is a big, big part of what you do. But what kind of life do I want to be living? What kind of people do I want to have around me? What do I want to be remembered as? What do I want my success up until that point to be? Do I want a diploma on my wall from Harvard, or would I be happy with one from, Cal Poly? Not that anybody knows what that is. It's in California. So I want to see myself in the future as the happiest version of myself. Of course, not to the detriment of others, but if you're like a mildly intelligent person, you can kind of recognize where that line needs to be drawn. And of course, people around you can check that too. Generally, if you do something wrong, people will let you know.
Right.
So I operate in the future. I operate now in pursuance of what I want to be when that happens. When I want to be in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. What will get me to that point? And when hiccups come, as they always do, there's I guess really, if you wanted to draw it out, there's sort of, it's a triangle of philosophy that I operate on. It's the live every day as well as you can, plan for the future that you want to see yourself in, and the third is understand. And this is probably the biggest and the one that most people kind of misunderstand about me, and so they don't make fun of me, but they find it interesting. Is you have to appreciate the position that you're in right now. The reason I can take problems, bad grades, bad relationships, failures, the reason I can take hiccups well is because I recognize, just with some perspective, okay, first of all, if we want to go really broad, I'm a human being, which as far as we know, is the only form of life in the universe that can perceive itself.
Right.
We're the only creatures with language, with society, with entertainment. We're the only things that can think of our own existence. And that is something that's so bafflingly impressive and just cool that so few people recognize, I think, especially in our age. There's a closed-mindedness that exists in a world where everything's right in front of you, especially in a world of technology. We see ourselves as these kind of special creatures, and I'll make sure to word this well. We see ourselves as these special creatures where the only thing that matters is this bubble around us and how we operate in it. But, this is going to sound stupid, like, touch some grass. Go outside. Touch some grass. Look, like, breathe oxygen of the only planet that can support life. Like, can you imagine how crazy that is? Out of the millions and billions and trillions of planets in this universe, and out of the millions and billions and trillions of species on this one planet, you are one of the 8 billion lucky few who can say that they have thought and language and happiness and sadness and, relationships. And not only that, but even of that 8 billion, you are of 330 million who are in what is generally considered to be one of the most successful and democratic and free and safe countries on the planet. And of that 330 million, you're a part of a very small group who live in one of the safest parts of that place. And so, when I remember that, and I think about the problems in my life, call it a bad grade, call it, a poor relationship I'm having with somebody, call it a disagreement, whatever it is. Everything else is going so well. Even if nothing personally is going well, everything else is still legitimately going well. And the thing I have to deal with is the way that this comes across a lot of times is a dismissal of the problems of individuals, which is what it is. That should not be what it is. Your individual issues, concerns, worries, things that affect you in your life are vital, and they're the things that are closest to you so that you feel them the most. And you absolutely should, you should never dismiss problems in your life. I'm not saying, oh, just push things down. Oh, just ignore it. Oh, it doesn't matter. That's not it. But sometimes I see people with problems that are, at least in part, self-perpetuated by this idea that either they can't change it, or it's so big that it's never going to change, or, it's this soul-crushing thing that could be solved if they had sort of a wider perspective of this beauty of this world that's around them that we've become so familiar with that we ignore. I mean, think about how crazy it is that you can have almost anything on your door in 2 days with a push of a button on a, pane of lights that flash and change colors. That's like alien magic technology. That's like, show a phone to somebody from the 50s and they will combust.
Fair enough.
We're living in this time of medicine and of entertainment and of technology and globalization that, don't get me wrong, has major problems. Are we destroying the planet? Probably. Are we still going to wars? Yes. Do people hate each other? Yes, they do. But at the same time, you have to recognize we legitimately do have it better now than at any other point ever. Think about that. I mean, what other time in history would you want to live in? Let's think.
I mean, they all have downsides, right?
They all have downsides. Absolutely. But think, 60s. The country was absolutely torn over the civil rights movement, over the war in Vietnam. People were being drafted. People were dying. There was a major shift in culture. That was a major sticking point for the country. There was a lot of hate in the 70s or in the 60s and 70s. If you're talking about the 80s, well, there was a major shift for neoconservatism. The inflation was massive. There were still major problems when it came to racial relations in America and globally, realistically. The USSR was, finally coming to a close, but we were still in the midst of the Cold War. If you're talking about the 50s, you want to talk about Jim Crow, baby, there it is. You want to talk about some of the most heinous crimes committed. Look at East Asia during that time. 40s, World War II. 30s, World War II and partially the Depression. 20s, you can't drink. There's no modern medicine. Cars barely exist. 1910s, World War I. The 1900s, it's basically the Dark Ages. In learning about history, and that's why history is so interesting to me, is because it gives you a level of perspective where oh wait, slavery wasn't that long ago. Slavery was a couple hundred years. That's 3 to 4 generations. That's not a lot. So where we are now is such a massive departure from even 50 years ago. And I mean, ask your parents, ask your teachers, ask people older than you what it was like growing up during these times. And I'm sure they'll have a certain level of nostalgia around it. But if you really dig, they'll let you know, no, you have it pretty good now. This device that I have in my pocket is something to the tune of 1,000 times more powerful than the computer that sent a man to the moon. And just nobody cares. People, they're like, oh, that's neat, and then proceed to keep scrolling Instagram. Again, call me old-fashioned, call me like a boomer, which a lot of people do. It's funny, it's fine, please do. But when you're operating your life, when you're existing, recognize, look, it could be a whole lot worse, and it has been a whole lot worse, and chances are the bad times don't last forever. I mean, even societally, think, people in the 60s were legitimately daily worried about the world ending because of the Cold War. There was a great video I saw of kids in the 60s being interviewed on what they thought the year 2000 would look like. And I swear to you, half of them said, yeah, we'll probably have nuked ourselves off the face of the planet by then. And you have to think, we're pretty lucky that our biggest problem is oil prices. Is the magic device outside in the driveway that can take us place to place in a tenth of a time that it would take us to walk is going to cost a little more to operate. Granted, of course, that's a massive simplification. It costs money to ship goods and foods. People may not be able to afford things that they may need for survival, and that's a big issue. And obviously, to that end, there's still major failings in society. But for the most part, especially in a country like this, day-to-day survival is no longer a concern of people. Just survival. Of course, prosperity is a different idea, whether that be economic. The ability to pursue your own happiness may be more easily halted. But survival isn't a worry anymore. And when you think about us as a species, that is an incredible achievement. Because what other species can say they're not worried about survival? None of them. Not a single. There's not a species on this planet that doesn't have to fight to live, other than us. We have beds, houses, clothes. I have a box on my desk that can send me any piece of information ever known to man, like that, by me typing it into a bar on the screen of lights. And I have things on my head that we've engineered that vibrate air to make noise that we recognize. And I think of these things, and I think, oh yeah, the C I got on the Cuneo DBQ. Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? And who, like, how was I worried about that? And again, to reiterate, it doesn't mean that your own personal problems don't matter. They absolutely do. And again, the closer something is to you, the way more it's going to affect you, which is why people get these sort of narrow perceptions of the world. It's because we don't see all 8 billion people at once. None of them are near us. We know ourselves, our families, our homes, our circle of friends, our schools, our towns, maybe our state and our country. But outside of that, I mean, there's no real... And to that end, it's only the human aspect, generally. We can only, the only things we really understand are that which is immediately surrounding us. Again, the things that affect us day to day. Which kind of goes back to that idea of us blaming things like the school bureaucracy for changes that impact us. We're going to be the most directly affected. It's going to change our lives negatively the most. So we're going to hyper-focus on it. And in evolutionary times, that was the best way. Because, of course, negatives I have to be more potent than positives, because it's the negatives that are going to get you killed, and the positives are just going to kind of keep you surviving. There's an adage I kind of heard of, and it sort of relates. It's that it was during the War on Terror in the early 2000s, the Department of Defense, some member of the Department of Defense essentially said, look, the terrorists only have to get lucky once, and we have to be lucky every single day. And what that boils down to is, when a bad thing happens, we're going to perceive it as world-ending because it potentially could be. It's like imbued within us. If one day you slip up once and you trip and like a lion rips your head off, that's it. That's game. So you really pay attention to things like that. Of course, in modern day, that lion ripping your head off, we interpret to be the Cuneo grade, which, it's important, don't get me wrong, but it's not a lion ripping your head off. Like, you're not going to die tomorrow if you don't want to, chances are. Like, at a certain point, you have to recognize the position that you're in. And I'm really curious on your thoughts about this, because this has been a point of agreement and contention among everybody who I've brought it up to. Mostly a point of contention, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say, because it's something that, everybody kind of has their own interpretation on, and few are quite as broad as the one I have.
Right. And I think I do agree with you in that it's good sometimes just to take a step back and I guess appreciate the world that you live in, the environment you find yourself in, the experiences that you face, and definitely that we have, I think, definitely progressed as a species, and just not being subject to the same I guess negative circumstances that were once present to us. And I think, yeah, we definitely do have it better off than we did maybe 10, 20, 30 to a century ago. And I think that's definitely just like I don't know. I think we're still in our period of exponential growth. I think the population is still rising, and then just overall, I guess like infant mortality rates, just overall lifespan and stuff like that. Yeah, like us as a species, we're only going up. I believe.
Yeah. And again, that's not to say that won't change. I mean, we are legitimately, like you were saying, it's exponential growth. A lot of the changes I brought up have been in the last 50 years. If you look at something like the 1600s versus the 1700s, there's not a whole ton of change. So our scale is warped, certainly, because the 20th century produced such advances so quickly that it shifted massive swaths of society, and we just don't really necessarily know the effect of this yet, i.e. industrialization and the climate. Nobody has any idea whether or not we'll be able to live here in 100 years. Some people say we've got 10 good ones left. Some people say we're fine. Nobody really knows. We kind of agree, yeah, it's probably bad, and we're going to want to head in a different direction, or, Florida's going to be gone. So whether or not things get better or worse is going to be very important in these few years, and that's the time that we're going to be growing up in. So it's important to consider that, for sure. And like you said, exponential growth, things like overpopulation. It's when we don't have natural predators and all of us can survive until 80, what does that mean for the resources of the planet being able to sustain that population? Eventually there's going to be a critical mass hit, and then what happens? You're going to have to pick and choose who can and can't get the resources of the planet. But the other thing is human beings are so adept at change that we've been able to withstand things that would have wiped out all kinds of other species. I mean, problems that we have faced are numerous.
Right. Yeah, I think.
But
no, I think it's always fair to just like have faith in the human ingenuity and just being able to work things out. I mean, like heck, we've gone through a pandemic now, and while it certainly is bad, and people have died, I think it could have been a lot worse if it had been, maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely. And there certainly may be a point made that things will end up getting worse, that we're going to hit some kind of snag that, will finally do us in. And that is actually something I do legitimately worry about sometimes is, am I a part of one of the last generations? Will we find a way to wipe ourselves out while I'm still alive? Ideally, I'd hope not, because I think it's what we've built here is kind of cool. I'd rather not be the one to see the bombs drop, but should it come down to it, that kind of ties back into my live every day as though it could be your last. Because if you enjoy everything that you have right now, and you recognize, okay, things could be worse, I'm gonna, things could be better. Certainly, everything could be better. I mean, there's innumerable problems that we still have that we could change, and that hopefully we will change. But the thing is, a lot of the times we don't focus on all of the problems we've already solved because we don't think about them anymore because they're problem solved. Why would you think about something that no longer affects you? We hyper focus on what is present, immediate, and negative. And it will drag people down, it will drag societies down, it will bog the machines of work and of thought into these boxes that they don't need to be bogged down in. It's such it's a really hard thing to wrap your head around. I mean, it's like it's like understanding impossible numbers. It's like trying to think of infinity. You can't because it doesn't work. But we've come really far. We are in a place that's pretty good right now for a lot of people, especially people like us. I mean, really, how much better could it get in this day and age? Unless you're like, some millionaire son. And even then, that's it's really about as good as it gets for us right now. If you look at that from that perspective, you have to determine, okay, is the only way from here down, or can we find a way to make it better? There's still room for improvement, as we've admitted, and there's great potential for catastrophe, as we've also admitted. And that is going to be determined by, most likely, our generation, on whether or not we want to solve the problems or we want to press the big red button. So it does beg the question, where do we think we're going to go with the people that we know? I mean, think about people you know. Would you want them running the country? There's some I can say, that's a good idea. There's some I can say, well, it was a good run. Like, that's the bottom line. And we have to figure out which one of those two people are going to be the ones dictating, or at least which kinds of those people are going to be the ones running the future. And in a day and age where communication is infinite and thought is never ending and division is so heated and technology allows for this global market of goods and money and ideas, it's almost so unnatural to us as like savannah crawling apes that we have no idea what it's going to do to us in 10, 20, 30, 100 years. We just don't. There's no way. There's no way for us to predict that because it's an impossible model. And so we have to be very wary with what things we accept, what things we don't, what our goals are, and how we perceive the world around us. And part of that involves not getting bogged down in our own bubbles, in our own tribes, communities, personalities, online, and just appreciating some of the things that we've been through and have. That's really what it boils down to. That's what it is.
Yeah. I think that's a really good positive message to probably end on. I mean, I don't want to cut this necessarily short, but we are going on, a little over an hour. So maybe we would wrap this up a bit. But I guess to go back and to your question from a few minutes ago and to offer a little bit of my own take, and I think it's definitely good to take a step back, but I also think to also step back in another way and not necessarily view like the vastness of your I guess like the universe and your experience and your circumstances, but also I guess focus on the people around you, right? Us humans, we are definitely social beings, right? Just spending time with the people who you care about as well as the people that care about you. And so I think just having both just realizing that one mistake is not the end of the world, but also seeing your positive impacts on the people around you, and how if we do come together and if we work together, if we work for the benefit of each other, I think we can definitely get through a lot, if not. And so if I think we can, even if the situation is bad, even if war is breaking out, I think if we are able to both step back as well as see our relationships with others as well as work for the betterment of others, I think we'll be fine. Maybe that is a bit too optimistic, but it is
nothing wrong with optimism. Nothing wrong with optimism. Yeah, and even if you show up disappointed, you can say, well, I was a part of it. Like, that's the thing is, sometimes I worry, is the country gonna end? It'd be kind of cool to be at the end of a country. Like, it'd be bad. There'd be war and death and poverty. We know. But how many people can say, like, I was one of the last ones? Like, think about it. If you're talking about Rome, I was one of the last people to see Rome fall. That's kind of neat. Like, even just that, like, even if it's not optimistic, it's just take what good comes out of bad situations.
Yeah, just like zooming out and just looking at, just purely our existence. I think it's already a lot that we are here and we are, we're experiencing this now. And so
we're experiencing this now. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it was really lovely talking with you, Zach.
It was terrific talking with you, Sam.
We could probably.
I can't believe I haven't done this before.
Yeah, we could probably pick this up some other time. We are going on over an hour now, so I do kind of want to wrap it up. So,
yeah, wrap it up absolutely.
So any last words?
I've been Zack Ledesma. If you see me in the hall, feel free to say hi. If any of you've heard of me or not heard of me, well, now you definitely have. But yeah, I'm open. I'm available. Please.